Thank you for taking my call. Before we continue, could you say the first and third digits of your security PIN? Oh, I didn't catch that. Sorry. That's the second and fourth, please. Okay, lovely. All gone through. Did you see what I did there?
It's a scam. Never reveal your full security PIN, even if you think it's your bank calling. Learn how to protect yourself from fraud.
Of Mike Graham on TalkRADIO.
Now, let us say, without further ado, a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, very good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. We may have to interrupt you if there's a little press conference that we must go and check out for a minute or two.
Let's get on with it then.
So let's get on with it. You wrote this weekend that you're sure that Britain is not a corrupt country. I'm not sure everybody would agree with that.
Well, it seems to be a very wide definition of corruption in some people's minds. They use the word very loosely because they don't like some particular politician or form of politics. That's another question. I wasn't defending the political parties or the government or Al Johnson or anybody when I said this. I just think people should be careful how they use language. I lived in a corrupt country, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Yeah.
I had to bribe people simply to continue my daily life. And I have to tell you, it's completely different from anything I've experienced here. If you had, for instance, always to carry a £20 note on you in case you were stopped by the traffic cops and had to bribe them, then you'd know the difference. If you had to bribe council officials to get your garbage taken away, or bribe your dentist to have anaesthetic, then you'd know the difference. Or bribe your teacher to make sure your child got good marks in school. That was what went on in the Soviet Union. It doesn't go on here, and it's ridiculous to pretend that we've reached that stage. We should value what we have. You don't value what you have, you don't protect it. And I just think people use the word too loosely. And most of the responses are going, well, you say it's not corrupt, but look at this, that, and the other. I say, of course, I understand all these things are bad about the country, but to use the term corruption is just wrong. We simply don't have this. Look at the recent revelations about the Afghan army, which didn't exist.
Yes.
All the generals have simply trousered the money they've been given to pay the wages of the soldiers. The reason why the Afghan army didn't stand up for the Taliban was there wasn't an Afghan army.
That was a very interesting. I thought
that's corruption.
Yeah,
we don't have that here.
I thought that was a fascinating insight, actually, into what happened in Afghanistan. But I do seem to remember, and you may remember this as well, back in the pre kind of BT British Telecom days, you could, if you knew somebody, find a friendly member of the GPO to put a telephone line in your house, because otherwise you'd have to wait about 2 months for it.
Well, I do remember the influence existed. That was quite different. When I came to London to work on a Fleet Street newspaper, I remember managing editor certainly would have had a word with the GPO to get me, or I think British Telecom, as it even was by then, it was nationalised, to get me a phone. But that was much more a case of a newspaper using its influence to get someone a phone because it was essential for their work. I did say that there is a form of corruption by friendship. Which is very common in this country. The people are helping each other out.
Yeah.
But
is that not just as bad, though?
But that happens in any society.
Yeah, but is it not just as bad, though, if you're using influence because of who you are or who you know to leapfrog over somebody else in the same way that others are paying for it? How's that different?
Well, there's several things. First of all, it's inevitable, I'd say, in any society there will be networks of friendship and cooperation and backstretching which will exist, and I defy you to think of a way of making it impossible. But it's not the same as money changing hands, simply so that you can live your life in a normal fashion. So people get advantages, but the whole of the Soviet system was supposed to make everybody equal.
Yeah.
But the actual consequence of it was probably the most unequal society that ever existed, with the elite living in secret luxury behind 15-foot green fences in nice country dachas and driven around in limousines, and everybody else slogging along bribing the dentist.
Yeah.
And that is, they even had, for goodness sake, the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party had their own hospital.
Yeah.
Which nobody else could go to. Now, we just don't have that, and it's language inflation to go around saying that we have because some MP has been doing a second job. You need to address these things with care, rather than just shouting and screaming corruption. So what is the problem? How do we solve it? But the lax use of language is absurd. I said, most of us have visited corrupt countries, possibly without knowing it. My advantage is I lived in one, and when you live in one, you have to come to terms with it. What do you do? And I'll tell you what you do. You become involved with it, because life becomes impossible if you don't. We simply don't have that here. Let's say, rejoice in that and be vigilant against it coming here. But don't use the term so loosely that you have nothing to say when the real thing happens. It's like screaming when you've got a cut finger.
Yes. I was listening over the weekend to Lord Heseltine attempting to make out that John Major had used two words very precisely, and his description was political corruption. I'm not quite sure what the difference is supposed to be, and I wasn't buying that political corruption is somehow different from corruption.
I don't know what he means there. I know, obviously, if a country is corrupt, then politics will be involved in that corruption, because what you're selling is the power that you've obtained. No, that's how the reason why this country is largely incorrupt is partly because of a Christian and Protestant tradition which placed a very high level of value on trust, and secondly because of the very intelligent reforms made, particularly in the civil service in the 19th century. Which created a governing system which was based largely upon merit. Now, we've done as much as we can in the last 50 years to undo that, but a lot of it still exists. Also, we still do have, to some extent, reasonably vigilant media who can actually point out and expose corruption when it happens. And this is also weakening. And we are moving towards circumstances where we may well become a corrupt country. But we won't protect ourselves against it by saying that we've already reached that destination.
No, indeed. I've often wondered, because I never quite found myself in the same situation as you, but I often wondered what I would do if stopped in a car by somebody who I figured would be probably in need of a bribe or in want of a bribe. I was always too frightened to offer them one and put the old $100 bill into the wallet just in case it was the wrong move, and they then tried to do you for bribery.
Well, exactly. There are techniques and phrases which people learn, and things which you do, so not to actually draw attention to the fact that you are doing what you're doing.
Right.
And it is something which people learn. There was also in the Soviet Union a thing called blat. It's hard to translate. It sort of means influence, but it means a lot more. So a friend of mine whose grandfather was a Red Army general, he was very upright, old-fashioned old Bolshevik, very honest and determined to be straight. But when it came to her choice of school, he knew she was clever, and he wanted her to go, his granddaughter, to go to the best school in Moscow, school number 1, which was an extremely good school. And once in his life, he used his influence as a Red Army general to get her into that school. So that happened too. That is also a form of corruption, and in closed societies it's much, much more prevalent than it is in open ones. Again, where we've made this much worse is by demolishing our meritocracy, which we had through the state grammar schools in the 50s and 60s, and turning ourselves into a society where you can buy educational and therefore professional privilege, and that is itself, it's a bad thing. It's not corruption. But it's wicked.
Yes.
It's
and
wrong.
I think it also happens.
If you're truly against it, then I say one of the things you would absolutely do would be to restore meritocracy in education. Oh no, the 11 plus is so horrible, we can't do that. That's discrimination. Well, okay. In that case, if you don't have that, then what you will have is what we do have.
Yeah.
Which is basically privilege available only to the wealthy.
Yes, and I don't remember the 11 plus particularly casting people who didn't pass it or didn't do too well in it into the sort of abyss of the bottom of the pile. You know, people went to secondary modern schools and learned things perfectly well and got reasonably good jobs afterwards. It wasn't the end of their careers as such, was it?
No, in fact, there's a guy called Stroud who's written a very interesting book about the secondary modern schools called Secondary Mod, which goes into the fact that many of the secondary modern schools are actually rather good and got their pupils by one way or another good A-levels or even into university. Some of them are, of course, terrible, but then so are some of the modern comprehensives, possibly even some of the ones classified by Ofsted as outstanding. which 1 in 5 of our secondary schools apparently are. 1 in 5, outstanding, isn't that good?
Isn't brilliant, yeah.
It's like all those fantastic numbers of A stars and A grades and first class degrees we churn out these days.
Yeah.
What a great education!
Well, I mean, one of the things that's always been a curiosity to me is why schools individually strive for an Ofcom 1, Ofsted 1 rather, when they know that the only thing that's going to happen once they get an Ofsted 1 is that they're going to become an overcrowded school and they'll quickly become an Ofsted 2/3 again. And the way to get a 1 is not actually through academic excellence. It's about having very interesting, social programs that people can learn things about, other countries and other cultures and all sorts of stuff like that. But as soon as a school gets an Ofsted 1, it immediately falls into rack and ruin.
Well, I suppose so, except that almost all schools which are any good develop techniques of selection.
Yeah.
All good schools are selective, but what you can't do is select openly. You have to select by some kind of back door and deciding you'll only take pupils from such and such a school, or limit your catchment area to such a size that almost nobody can get there, or whatever it happens to be. Or you can simply, the headmistress can get in the papers saying, I won't have people with funny hairstyles in my school, thus sending a signal to a large part of the population of the town that they won't get in. All that sort of stuff is part of our education system. We have masses of secret, unacknowledged, uncontrollable selection. But the one thing we will not have, and which is illegal under the Blair Education Act, is selection by ability. That's not allowed. All other forms of selection you can do as much as you like. These are, I suppose you could say, forms of corruption, but I say they simply don't equate with the actual money bribe system which exists in truly corrupt countries.
No, I'm sure that's absolutely right. We're just going to take a little break from you, Peter, because this Liverpool police press conference is underway. Let's go and check it out. There's a potential suicide bomber. Let's go back to Peter Hitchens. Thankfully, Peter, it's a much less serious incident than perhaps what it could have been. I'm not expecting you to know any more, obviously, than what we've just heard, but a shocking situation nonetheless.
I think it's always better to stay silent about these things until we know an awful lot more than we ever do. Often you don't find out much about them until the actual trials or inquests take place. So I prefer to keep accounts.
No, I understand that. Let's stick with the theme of education, because you also wrote yesterday about a show which I haven't actually seen called Show Trial on the BBC.
I recommend it.
Is it good?
It's a good watch. Yeah, I think I'd be surprised if you don't find it enjoyable as a drama in itself. Some very good acting in it, and it gives, I think, a very accurate picture of what modern Britain looks and sounds like as well. Except one thing they can't get right, television people can never get newspaper headlines right, and also they can never get demonstrations right. It never looks quite right. But leave that aside. It's a good crime drama and a good courtroom drama at the end.
Right.
I watched it to the end, so don't ask me what happened. No, of the things that are on TV at the moment, it's one of the more appealing.
No, but you said you were slightly dismayed by the use of drugs, or the mention of drugs, and the kind of frequency of drug use in it.
Well, it's just simply accepted by the police officers and by the Crown Prosecution Service people and everybody, in fact, that it's perfectly normal for these students at a British university to be taking drugs. And of course, the case is a case of murder, but the point about it is, and I don't want to give anything away here. The point about it is that almost certainly the murder itself could not have taken place unless the killer had been using drugs. But the descriptions of their evenings when they're being questioned about these events and the suspects simply say, "Well, I was on drugs. I don't really remember everything. I've taken so many drugs." And nobody says, "Oh, right. Well, what drugs were those, or where did you get them?" There's also that one of the characters, a minor character in the drama, is a drug dealer who's treated pretty much as if he was the milkman. And there's nothing suggested. It's not suggested what he's up to is a fantastically immoral occupation. This is normal, and I think this is absolutely true. It's one of the reasons why the program is so persuasive. I think this is a true portrayal of modern Britain. The police don't give a tinker's curse about drugs, and nor do the authorities. And I can't count the number of times when quite startlingly violent and inexplicable crimes have taken place. I've gone to various police forces and said, well, excuse me, can you tell me, did you investigate the drug use of the perpetrator? And they wriggle and fuss, and sometimes I have to go to the Information Commissioner to get them to admit that they never actually looked into it at all. Just weren't interested.
No.
But actually, if they were interested, they'd find the key to an awful lot of the crime that takes place. I constantly harp on this amazing website. There's also a book made by the person who created it called Attacker Smoked Cannabis. And what he does is he goes through all the local newspaper reports of violent crime, where the user turns out to have been a long-term user of marijuana. And the number of these things is astonishing. They don't get reported nationally because this kind of crime is now so routine that national papers aren't interested in it. It would have 30 or 40 years ago, many of these crimes would have made national papers. Now they don't. Yeah. And it's absolutely astonishing. And when Professor Dame Carol Black was doing a supposed inquiry into drugs and crime a couple of years ago, he and I together put together a file of all this stuff and sent it to her. Although she sent a sort of acknowledgement, there was no sign at all she was particularly interested in the information at all, and the authorities just aren't. And as long as they are, they'll never get to the bottom of most of this. No. The point that I make over and over again is that most people cannot easily kill another person. We're terribly and rightly inhibited against doing so. Even if you had in your hand an extremely sharp knife or a gun, you would find it incredibly difficult to kill somebody. But a person whose mind has been seriously addled by drugs could kill you with a ballpoint pen. And it's this removal of inhibitions, and indeed the often pretty much insane behavior of people who've been long-term users, particularly of marijuana, is a very important feature in an awful lot of crime in our country, but nobody cares. And it's time it was investigated.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure even if it's a possession is an offence anymore, because I seem to remember under Gordon Brown it went backwards and forwards from being class B to C to D to A to B. I've no idea what you're supposed to do.
Class B, possession of marijuana is class B, a maximum prison sentence of 5 years, and also an unlimited fine. But
that's not in practice.
Nothing remotely resembling these penalties is imposed. In fact, in general, the police first of all introduced the supposed cannabis warning, which was given to people found in possession, which wasn't recorded and had no legal status. And then, after a while of doing that, they stopped bothering to do that either. And you can pretty much be found in possession of it. They don't want to know. One of the reasons they don't want to know is if you arrest someone for possession, then you've got all the business of handling the drugs which are confiscated. It makes life very complicated.
It does. So I guess the situation
they've decrimed it.
I guess if you were standing on the street corner smoking a joint and pontificating about something which was considered to be a hate crime by speech, you'd probably be done for the hate crime, and they wouldn't worry about the drugs.
I think that's about right, yes.
Brilliant. Marvellous. Listen, Peter...
So stay on Twitter and you can do what you like.
Quite, exactly. Great to talk to you, as ever. Sorry for the interruption. Peter Hitchens, Mail and Sunday columnist there, talking about the drug use of people in this country, but also why he believes that Britain is not, in fact, a corrupt country. Also, we heard from the Merseyside police there